Mari kita bantu ini tadi untuk yang pertanyaan siapa yang mana itu nanti
buat apa nanti sama stafnya Gadjah Phasporn boleh.
Berarti yang typing-nya kita.
Mereka bisa pertanyaan gini kan sih kayak.
Iya.
Ini nanti pertanyaannya di chat.
Kok lambat banget ya, saya udah gini, saya nunduk, sekarang saya lihat masih nunduk tadi.
Ya kalau di pas live streamingnya hilang
di delay, Pak. Pak, masa bisa Pak bagaimana? Apalagi kalau udah live gini.
Good morning, panelists. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today and welcome to the first webinar of the ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation discussion series. Our webinar today takes on the theme of Women, Peace and Security, and COVID-19 in ASEAN, which aims to discuss about the degree of impact that the pandemic poses against the Women, Peace and Security agenda. The discussion will also seek to explore both the challenges, opportunities of women during these times of the pandemic. Before we begin, please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Devita. I'm currently the Project Management Officer here in ASEAN-IPR. And before we begin, the Executive Director of ASEAN-IPR, Mr. Reslan Isariani, will give an introductory remarks. Over to you, Mr. Reslan.
Thank you. Excellencies, Madam Moderator, distinguished resource person, participants, colleagues, and friends. Good morning and welcome to the ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation webinar series. As the moderator has said, today is the first of the series and the theme is on women, peace and security and COVID-19 in ASEAN. The important issue of women and its role in peace processes has been the focus of the Institute from the very beginning of its establishment in 2017 through the holding of a number of seminars and workshops. Fast forward in 2018, the ASEAN-IPR launched the establishment of the ASEAN Women for Peace Registry. It consists of 27 distinguished women experts in different fields related to peace and reconciliation. The AWPR is to contribute to the implementation of the 2017 joint statement, ASEAN Leaders Joint Statement on Promoting Women, Peace and Security in ASEAN, which encourage the integration of gender perspective in all conflict prevention initiatives and strategies. One of its important roles is to assist in peace processes and reconciliation efforts in member states at the request of the relevant ASEAN member states. Ladies and gentlemen, nowadays, many reports are indicating that the impact of COVID-19 pandemic is disproportionately affecting women and exacerbates the existing gender inequalities, be it in the health as well as socioeconomic field. This webinar today is timely to also see what is the impact of the pandemic towards the WPS agenda and what to do about it. To discuss the matter or the issue, we are fortunate to have with us Ambassador Phasporn, Sangasubana, permanent representatives of Thailand to ASEAN, moderating the discussion with three distinguished experts, Amina Rasul-Bernardo, Sri Danti Anwar, and Sri Wiyanti Eddyono. Thank you all for participating at this webinar, and over to you, Ambassador Phasporn.
Good morning and swadika to everyone virtually, especially to Edi Reslan, as well as to the speakers. As I definitely agree with Edi Reslan that today's webinar is very timely. We all recognize that the global outbreak of the COVID-19 is a crisis that affects human lives. And COVID-19 is indeed a crisis with multi-dimensional perspective, whether it's political security, economy, and society. And this has definitely affect women and girls in everywhere, including Southeast Asia. And Women, Peace and Security Agenda is definitely more relevant now. And women's lens and perspective on the gender perspective of the impact of COVID-19 is very vital. So with this, I will begin with the webinar with the first speaker. The first speaker is Ibu Sri Danti Anwar, and she is the member of the ASEAN Commission on the Promotion and Protection of the Rights of Women and Children. And she has been the former chair in 2017-2018. And ACWC is definitely a very important ASEAN sectoral body that takes care of the protection and promotion of rights of women and children in our region. With this, I give you the floor to Ibu. I'm sure that your remarks will be very relevant, especially for the audience, in order to adapt to the national as well as the regional policy. Ibu, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. Good morning to you all. I hope you can hear me clearly. Okay. Yes, I representing the ACWC, Asian Commission on the Promotion and Protection of the Rights of Women and Children, or ACWC. So ACWC is an intergovernmental consultative body. We have 20 representatives, 10 representatives representing women's rights. So I'm one of the representatives from Indonesia representing women's rights, and 10 representatives representing children's rights. So allow me to share screen so that we can follow. I really follow the TOR from the organizer. Yeah, next. As the introduction, I already, yeah. Actually, this year in October, we will mark the 20th anniversary of the adoption of UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. Next. During the COVID-19, women disproportionately affected by COVID-19. Generally speaking, this time of crisis tends to reveal and reinforce socio-economic inequalities, redistribution of power in societies, and lack of resources generally impact women more than men in general. And we remember we have the social restrictions, even lockdowns in some ASEAN member states. And these lockdowns or social restrictions have resulted in increased risk of domestic violence for women and children as well. Especially children who have to study at home, they are also affected by the cyber violence triggered by the increase in the usage of online platforms. The UN Women has recently announced that the COVID-19 threatens to push back the limited gains on gender equality and exacerbate the feminization of poverty. So Ambassador Danti has correctly said that the spread of COVID-19 pandemic is more than health issue, since it also contains economic and social impact. In my next presentation, I would follow the TOR. So I would discuss the substance 1 on the challenges and impacts of women face in times of global pandemic. Excuse me. As I mentioned before, the movement restriction had resulted, among others, in heightened risk of domestic violence for women and children, and cyber violence triggered by the continued usage of online platform by children. And especially the pandemic has led to school closure. This also resulted in tremendous demands for women as caregivers of their family. And in this case, women are extremely overburdened with domestic chores and family care. Next, so those are some of the challenges. And another challenge is that in the workforce, women are usually the ones who are laid off than men, especially those who work in manufacturers, in factories, or in informal sector. Now we also identified that the female-headed households also had adverse impact with regard to the COVID-19. And with the limited access of women to economic resource, will result in feminization of poverty. So in order to address the issue of the impact of COVID-19 to women, we ACWC had on the 5th of June, we have a special online meeting on protective and preventive measures for women and children at risk of violence domestic during COVID-19 pandemic. And these are some of the strategies and policies and measures conducted by ASEAN member states as follows. The first one is Brunei Darussalam. Brunei Darussalam reported that in order to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, they have the three component areas. First is the maintaining the well-being of public through the establishment of isolation center and mobile application to provide information. And the second one, in order to address the issue of layoffs or temporary work termination, they also have the providing support for individuals, for example, temporary suspension of recruitment of foreign workers. And then they also have the support for business, in particular, providing platform to monitor the price of product, in particular masks, and also provide the hand sanitizer. And then there is also sufficient stock of rice and sugar. In Cambodia, it was also reported that the pandemic has led to increase in the incidence of domestic violence due to lockdown. So in partnership with CSO and development partners, they developed access of women together with CSO on the prevention message. So this is online message on protective items and essential service or social media. And they also conduct an assessment of impact of COVID-19 in select province focusing on gender-based violence. In Indonesia, it was also informed that the task force on preventing and handling of COVID-19 was established. And the protocols were also developed, among others, on the prevention and handling of violence against women and children through virtual consultation and hotline. And the government also provide special assistance and basic needs to women and children, the elderly, and the disabled across the country to help with their economy. In Laos PDR, it was informed that in order to address the issue of domestic violence during COVID-19, they increase awareness and reaching women and children on the production of through the production of TV spot on coping with pandemic. Laos also provided support for returning workers. And the fifth country, Malaysia, also informed that the government had dedicated hotline to provide counseling services to women and children of victims of domestic violence in collaboration with CSO, as well as establishment of temporary shelters home for victims, including child care center. Myanmar also reported that they have the national helpline services set up for people, including women and children, to provide psychosocial support. And they also provide one-stop center to address gender-based violence and provide childcare services and online training for social workers to handle cases on domestic violence. The Philippines inform, among others, they also have an online platform such as social media being used to spread information on securing assistance from the police and access legal and health services. And there's also Intergency Council has been established to ensure the continued delivery of support services and help victims report incidents of violence while observe social distancing measure. Singapore also reported that they also open all services in public, private, and people sector. They all remain operational, including ensuring access to crisis center for victims of abuse and violence. And they have this Break in Silence campaign. So this Break in Silence campaign is also promoted and enhanced. They also provide counseling and mediation. In Singapore, there's also a task force setting up to tackle domestic violence. The government also developed guidance on building resilience and staying safe at home. Thailand, among other, reported the establishment of hotline centers and one-stop service at the community level and the conduct of online rapid survey. So in partnership with UNICEF, Thailand also reported that they prepared guidelines on ensuring the safety of children and community. Last, in Vietnam, Vietnam also informed the establishment of 24-hour hotline centers and shelters to women and children victims of domestic violence and detection services that investigates incidents of violence. The government also enhanced communication and raise awareness on preventing gender-based violence. So this is a half-day online meeting that we have on the 5th of June, chaired by our ACWC chair from Singapore. And based on the meeting, we have several recommendations. So these recommendations will be discussed later on in our next meeting in November. Some of the recommendations at the regional level are it's good to have continue to exchange best practices on how to cope the impact of COVID-19, especially to women and children. And then the second recommendation, develop a study on the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic to women and children in order to design programs and activities. And there is also a recommendation on how to expand the collaboration with other pillars. So ACWC is under the pillar of socio-cultural community. So since women and children is a cross-cutting issue, we also have to coordinate with other pillars. So this is one recommendation, that we have to coordinate with economic pillar to discuss the impact of COVID-19 in addressing the issue, especially in economic area. And there are also another recommendation to continue campaign against violence against women and children. And number 5, establish information sharing platform on the prevention mitigation. We have the ACWC fund. This also can be used to support some projects relating to helping vulnerable women and children affected by this pandemic. And 6th recommendation is examine the impact of COVID-19 in the lives of women and girls. And 7 and 8 is increasing awareness and develop programs. So that is the end of the sub-theme 2 and how to handle the issue of domestic violence as impacted by COVID-19. Now, with regard to WPS agenda, so the WPS agenda, we know that UN Security Council resolution adopted in 2000 is identified as the cornerstone of women, peace, and security agenda at the United Nations. So this resolution was the culmination of decided of activism and advocacy works by civil society organization. And in this resolution, we also recognize the gendered impact of armed conflicts and the active roles played by both women and men in the pursuit of lasting and sustainable peace. I would like to argue that the domestic violence also can disrupt the peace and security. So when we talk about women, peace and security in ASEAN, especially among ACWC member states, we don't only relate the women, peace and security to the armed conflict or social conflict only, but also to other conflict, including the domestic violence and as part of the peace and security as well. We cannot have peace and security if women and children still experience violence or domestic violence in this case. Next, yes, there is also a question, and what is the WPS agenda? There are 3 pillars of women, peace, and security agenda. One is on the prevention, in how we have to prevent the conflict, including the prevent the social conflict, armed conflict, as well as other conflicts related to conflicts, such as the domestic violence, sexual harassment, or cyber porn, or trafficking, or violent extremism. And then the second pillar is the protection, how we protect the victims from this area, and then the participation. And then there is another pillar added, which is the political economy pillar. This is also important to have this pillar, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, where most of the livelihood of the people has been affected. So the political and economic pillar is also part of women, peace, and security agenda. Now in ASEAN as well, actually it's a bit late. Yeah, as you know, the resolution has been launched in 2000, while ASEAN member state just had the commitment to implement the women, peace, and security agenda in 2017 by the launch of the joint statement in promoting women, peace, and security adopted in 2017 by ASEAN leaders. So the joint statement in promoting women, peace, and security actually emanates from the ASEAN socio-cultural community pillar. You know, in ASEAN, there are 3 pillars: ASEAN socio-cultural community pillars, ASEAN economic pillar, ASEAN political and security pillar. So the WPS actually is emanate from the ASEAN socio-cultural community pillar, and together with ASEAN community on women, we take part in adopting and then endorsing this, and then adopted by the leader. So based on that, can you go up, please? So the joint statement was jointly developed and endorsed by the ACWC and ASEAN Committee on Women, or ACW. So following the adoption of the joint statement by ASEAN leaders in November 2017, and the endorsement of the proposed multi-year programs to implement WPS, we in August 2019, we conducted the symposium on women, peace, and security agenda in Cambodia. So in the symposium 2019, there is also an agreement to conduct the regional study on women, peace, and security in ASEAN. So this regional study on women, peace, and security at the moment is still ongoing, and we just also established an advisory group on women, peace, and security to give input to our consultant in conducting the general study. And we were told that there is also an impact of COVID-19. I mean, some of the consultants cannot see or cannot meet in person our partners. So that is also an impact of the our study. But hopefully that this study will be next. Hopefully the study will be finished before August in 2020. Next, yeah. Next. I'm not going to read the TOR. Next. Yes, next. Yeah, so this the initial regional the study will be hopefully will be finished before August, before the ASEAN ministerial meeting in August 2020. So based on the regional study, ASEAN will of course formulate the regional program, multi-regional program. Next, the sub-theme is women at the forefront in fighting against the COVID-19. Basically, under the sub-theme, I once again try to illustrate on the different implications for women and men. We know that women are suffering on the front line against COVID-19, and the impact of crisis on women is stark. And women face compounding borders. They are overrepresented in working health system and exposed to greater infection, which is unprecedented. But at the same time, they are not found in leadership and decision-making process. So in this sub-theme, I would like to propose some of the policy options. There are quite a few policy options that I propose here. Can you go down, please, to the policy options? Policy options. I'm not going to read all the policy options. The first one, I will read the second one. Policy option to support women, workers, and families with caring responsibilities. Offering public children option to working parents in essential services such as healthcare, public utilities, and emergency services. And then providing alternative public care arrangement, offering direct financial support to workers who need to take leave, and then giving financial subsidies to employers who provide workers with paid leave, and promoting flexible working arrangements that account for workers, families, and responsibilities. And then the second one of the policy option that I would like to highlight is on the policy account of the income loss, extending access to unemployment benefit for non-standard workers, providing easier access to benefit targeted at low-income families, in particular single parents. Women, most of women are now single parents, so they are really affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. So we need to support that. The government needs to support that. And then the fourth one is policy option to support entrepreneurs and small business owners, including the small business entrepreneurs owned by women. And the last one that I would like to highlight is on the policy option. Next. With regard to the gender-based violence, number 5, number 1 is ensuring that service delivery for victims is integrated across relevant spheres, such as health, social service, education, employment, and justice, and that victims' needs and safety are considered when moving towards more electronically based mode of communication during the COVID-19 crisis. So since women and children is cross-cutting issues, so this is not only the responsibility of the pillar of social cultural only, but also it's across the pillar. So this is a good opportunity for ASEAN member states to collaborate, to synergize, and to coordinate to this issue of COVID-19. Because in the past, each ASEAN sectoral body only focusing on their own work. So COVID-19 pandemic impact is really an open opportunity for ASEAN member states, for the various ASEAN sectoral bodies to work together. And then the second one is adopting a whole of governance and risk-based approach to end gender-based violence, so that all public agencies are engaged in this issue in a closely coordinated manner, and ensuring that timely access to justice remain intact during this period. Because from our online meeting, we understand that there is a problem in assessing the shelters as well as the service providers due to social restriction as well as lockdown. So in order to solve that problem, we have to work together, making sure that women and children have access, even though during the lockdown as well as the social restriction. And then the sixth one, in order to make sure that women, peace and security agenda is using a gender perspective, we have to ensure that integrating gender impact assessment process and tools in emergency management. This integration requires a well-functioned system of gender mainstreaming, ready access to gender disaggregated evidence in all sectors and technical skills. Like I mentioned before, that in ASEAN our understanding of women peace and security in ASEAN is not only with regard to the conflict situation, but also it also encapsulates the violent extremism, trafficking in women, domestic violence, child pornography, as well as the issue with regard to the harassment. So it's more than just conflict, impact of conflict or social conflict. So in order to make sure that the policies on women, peace and security have a gender lens, we really need to implement the gender mainstreaming strategy. And then the fourth, ensuring that all policy and structural adjustment to support sustainable recovery through gender and intersectional analysis. And then number seven, we also try to integrate the women peace and security with gender lens and related to the SDGs as well, Sustainable Development Goals. So these are some of the options that I like to propose. The first one is building a strong political commitment to applying a gender perspective to policy responses, including women peace and security policies, of course, starting from the prevention, promotion, participation, and political and economic pillar, allowing arbitration of economic, social, and environment priorities critical areas. Ensuring that basic healthcare service, in particular related to reproductive and sexual health, are maintained, and providing and food aid to mitigate the economic impact of COVID-19 and to prevent the most vulnerable, primarily women and children, from falling into poverty. Sorry about the typo. And guaranteeing access to basic service and supporting measures for the most marginalized groups of women. And make sure that there is also a data collected on the impact of the crisis as systematically sex disaggregated to measure the effects of the outbreak in SDGs through gender lens. So in conclusion, we ACWC at the moment is still waiting for the regional study on women peace and security to be completed. So hopefully that it will be launched during the ASEAN Ministerial Meeting in August in 2020. So based on that, we will develop a regional program and projects based on multi-year program and in collaboration with other pillars as well. I think that's all I can share at the moment. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Ibu Sri Danti Anwar, and for walking us through with the three sub-themes all together. And we can see, especially your perspective as a member of the ACWC on how these three sub-themes can be taken by the important sectoral body concerned. Especially as you know that women, we are the first front line to notice the impact from COVID-19 pandemic. We are, in the family, but we are the forefront in the society and in economic sector. And you have rightly said that all ASEAN members are affected in one way or another. And I'm very happy that you have recognized that is a need for a coordinated effort among ASEAN, among the pillars. And I think that during the time that ASEAN is working on the recovery framework, the voice of ACWC has to be there. And you have come up with many policy recommendations, which is well taken. And from those policy recommendations, I also do have questions, like, for example, on the implementation of the joint statement in promotion of the women peace security by ASEAN leaders in 2017. As a member of ACWC, you can give us some perspective on whether it has been effectively implemented in our region or not. even though it's only from 2017. Now it's 2020, it's not that long, but we ASEAN have to keep up with this agenda. Another question is, I understand that there's a rise of domestic violence, and from your policy options, you have come up with the adoption of government whole application to fight and prevent the domestic violence that has been part of the impact of the COVID-19. I wonder if, from your perspective as ACWC, how you can help raise the awareness, especially in the national term, and then how it can be reflected in the regional term, and how ASEC, which is the ASEAN Secretariat, can help you on this regard. So with that, we will take the question and answer later on. I would like to ask the second speaker, which is Madam Amina Rasul-Bernardo. She's the president of the Philippine Center for Islam and Democracy and member of the board of Magbassa Kitab Foundation. And she also have extensive international network on this agenda. So the floor is yours, Madam Amina.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning to all. In October 2020, we will be celebrating the 20th anniversary of the adoption of UNSCR 1325 and the establishment of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. The 20th anniversary should be a memorable year for women, peace and security agenda advocates. Unfortunately, the coronavirus pandemic, which has engulfed all of us, has taken center stage. And we have been forced to not only cancel events, but we have had to shift resources from WPS activities to prioritize COVID programs and humanitarian efforts. Here in the Philippines, for instance, we were to have launched a program called the I Stand with Women Peace Builders in March. But on the day that we were to launch it, the university closed all major programs because of the lockdown. The lockdown in the Philippines has been one of the most severe in the world. Here in the Philippines, the pandemic has kept me home for the past 4 months. Work from home is the new normal. As the world is in crisis confronting this global pandemic, gender considerations, unfortunately, have been pushed to the background. And yet, we stakeholders know that the Women, Peace and Security Agenda is crucial to the current peace and security challenges, which are exacerbated by COVID-19. There has been a significant gap in analysis, as discussed by the previous speaker, regarding how both the crisis and the global response impacts women engagement in peace efforts. Note, for instance, like women's participation in policy and program implementation has been weak in many countries, even in our region, when you talk about what to do to confront this pandemic. 2, when you're looking at the ongoing peace processes that are currently underway face logistical challenges that further exclude key constituencies, especially women. 3, when you look at civil society in a space which is shrinking, civil society actors, especially those advocating for women's human rights, face the threat that the emergency response strategies of state actors might suppress their work. And 4th, additionally, based on what has happened in past pandemics and crises, the WPS-related work has been losing funding, further constraining the resources available for already underfunded activities. The issues, Madam Chair, that are so often called for by the WPS community are also relevant to fighting the pandemic. The WPS agenda, for instance, calls for a gendered analysis of the causes and consequences of crisis and the mapping of stakeholders and actors to ensure adequate preparation, mitigation, response, and recovery. We can see how that is relevant to the pandemic as well. Take, for example, sex disaggregated data about the pandemic. This data is crucial to the understanding of the impact of the virus. Note some of the information that have been released from South Korea, from Iran, China, Italy. Note that more women than men contract the disease, but more men are dying. In China, for instance, the Center for Disease Control showed that 64% of the deaths in China have been male, which is interesting. So we get the virus, but more of the men die. While the reasons are not entirely clear, there are many experts who theorize that perhaps lifestyle and biology may explain the difference. In terms of lifestyle, men make up majority of smokers and are therefore more prone to related illnesses than women. In terms of biology, women generally are supposed to have stronger immune systems than men and are therefore better able to fend off infections. Now, what is interesting to me, given the pressure of time, the lack of time to respond to programs working on this crisis, government should be looking to women to have a bigger role in programs countering the pandemic. And yet, women rarely have a role in the development and implementation of COVID policies and programs in our region. Instead, as the previous speakers noted, we see rising cases of men perpetrating violence against women during the lockdowns. Around the world, women peace builders continue to work within their communities to de-escalate violent conflict and prevent the resurgence or recurrence of conflict in post-conflict or transitional environments. However, their work is made increasingly more difficult by the framing of conflict resolution as a linear process. A fellow peace builder that who's part of our Women's Alliance for Security Leadership told us that most governments see peace processes as a linear approach. The linear approach is seen as the get out clause. As soon as one stage of the process breaks down, the government reverts back to the beginning of the process. And she says the pattern is used as an excuse not to move on. But conflict, as we know it, is actually a cycle. It's not a linear process. And most countries will experience multiple phases of the cycle simultaneously. One of our colleagues from the network, who is from Colombia, noted that many of the resources that were originally dedicated to peace negotiations have now been redirected to COVID prevention. And the result, violent conflict has reemerged there. Despite these challenges, note that women peace builders continue to seize opportunities to proceed with their work during COVID. The pandemic has exposed and exacerbated existing gaps in services on the ground and, I hate to say this, fundamental mistrust in the state. Many members of our network have pivoted their work from peace building to responding to urgent pandemic response and dealing with issues like food security and disease awareness. But funding has become a major issue. From what is evident to many women peace builders, development aid is not reaching local communities, and we need to rethink the purpose of development aid. COVID-19 has created an occasion for us to consider conflict prevention and more specifically, how to address the fundamental elements of conflict within our communities, faced as we are with the hazards of the pandemic. We have to find ways to urge our governments to implement the ASEAN resolution supporting WPS. In particular, I'd like to note the resolutions which calls on governments to encourage the integration of gender perspective and ensure the full participation of women in peace processes. It seems that these are receding into the background. There's also the resolution that says that we should encourage the inclusion of women, peace and security agenda in government policies and programs, and the creation of greater and wider spaces for participation. The space is shrinking and we need to keep it open. During the last ASEAN Women for Peace Registry meeting, which we had to do virtually, the members of AUPR and from the Philippines, this include former Peace Advisor Teresita Quintos-Deles and the former Executive Director of the Office of the Presidential Advisor on the Peace Process, Gloria Mercado, we came up with a statement which called on ASEAN and our member states to include the WPS agenda in the work on the pandemic. For instance, we had a resolution that our governments and ASEAN should chart a WPS agenda framework focusing on situations such as this pandemic, as well as other humanitarian crises. This framework will specifically demonstrate the WPS agenda pillars on prevention, participation, protection, recovery, and rehabilitation to ensure that girls and women will be treated equitably throughout the event of crisis management, government policy, and development programming by multiple stakeholders. We also, at that meeting, sought to encourage information sharing and the availability of gender disaggregated official statistics and other data pertaining to cases of COVID-19 affected persons in order to increase awareness on the impact of the pandemic and other crises among the male and female population, in addition to identifying prioritized issues that needs to be responded to. We also urged our governments to advance policy research on women's economic empowerment to strategically respond to their needs as a result of massive loss of jobs and livelihoods. One of the key objectives of the post-COVID-19 recovery and rehabilitation would be the economic security of women, not only as human resource in the region's market economy, but as an important pillar of the family unit. Our Women's Alliance for Security Leadership managed to have a meeting with the UN Security Council on July 13. And we also urged the members of the Security Council to continue to push for the WPS agenda to be implemented, and that it should not be pushed to the background as we deal with this pandemic, because statistics will show that women are better able to combat the health impacts of the pandemic. And it is a shame if those who are able to combat the effects of the pandemic are the ones who are going to be sidelined. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Amina. You have been very concise and go right to the substance. And I definitely agree with you when you strike out the challenge of the COVID-19 that has been affecting women and girls. is on the shifting of the resources. I also take into account what you have draw our attention on the cycle approach of the challenge, which make women and girls continue to be the vulnerable group in the society. I appreciate your effort, especially in urging the member of the UNSC Council for the in the agenda WPS to be on the agenda and not to put it as a background. I think that from my perspective, and especially from what you have been presenting, I think we women and girls, we are not asking anything new. We are asking for some type of a new approach of tackling the agenda, especially in integrating the recognition of women's and girls' role into the new normal of COVID-19. I think this is nothing new, but we need to see a more of a proactive approach, more or less. And this can be done both at the national, regional, and international forums and platforms. And I think the shifting of priority of WPS should not be there. It should be re-emphasized and actually replicate and also regionalize this priority that we have on the WPS. And I wonder if, you know, this is just my question, that what would be your perspective, especially when the impact of COVID-19, especially in this region, has on poverty. And you have rightly said that women and girls are a part of that poverty decreasing because due to the fact that there is the shift of resources to it and as well as priority to it. And poverty is part of the SDGs. I wonder what will be your perspective, how women and girls can help on this. You have said that there is a need for advancing on the policy and research for this agenda, how we can do that, and how you can advise to policymakers, especially in this region. So with that, I will now shift to the final speaker, which is Ibu Sri Wiyanti Eddyono, sorry, Eddyono. You are the lecturer, and actually you can give us academic perspective on this agenda. So the floor is yours, Madam.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and good morning, the chair of the session. So let me present this panel, presents my point of view through the PowerPoint. So it's easy for me to highlight some 3 issues that actually sent by me, by the organizer. But my presentation is based on my research and then my consultations with different peace builders, women peace builders in different areas and different countries. So this is more likely the summarize of our discussion in the past. Not past, but it's just last 2 weeks and 3 weeks ago. So let me start with the discussion of the sub-theme 1. It's about the challenge and impact women face in the time of global pandemic. I'm listening to the 2 previous speakers who present the data and then the situation. I think that there are different degree of women facing the impact brought by the challenge of COVID-19. And we do find there are different common problems happen in everywhere, such as the restrictions of mobility. Maybe can you go to the second slide? Thank you. So there are a different degree of women face. I think it's happen in everywhere. For example, like the restrictions of the mobility to the COVID protocols, losing their job, yeah, and then also viewer income. It has been discussed by Ibu Dati before. And then if we look at to specifically, we do also have the lack of access to education, because the changings of situation by using online teaching is not really, it's not everybody can access the online mechanism due to the access signal in different area, for example. So this make people feel like they can't access the education as they could get before. And then the lack of access of healthcare, because everybody, every institution actually focus on the pandemic 19, and then it seems that everybody need to stay healthy. They cannot have a problem of health. If they have a problem of the health, it's very difficult to access the healthcare. And then the other presenter have also discussed about the overburden carrying, the overburdens of women, because due to everybody have to work from working from home, in the same times carrying houses still the priority of the women, still the main job of the women in society. So they become have experience of burdens. And then this kind of situation actually put women as the new form of vulnerability, and then put everybody in the insecure situations. So when this, next to the next slide. Yeah, the insecurity actually influence us a lot how to react to the COVID. Yeah, and then tension exists in every levels, in domestic levels, in the public, and then in some issues, it raised the rate of domestic violence and the divorce cases. And in community level, there is any continued violence, it's not stopped. And then we also find there are cases that where the minority group are still oppressed. We also find that the threat of fundamentalism are still there. So through our discussions with the partners in different context area, we just found that the COVID-19 pandemic actually has intensified the challenge faced by women in different contexts, whether it is in conflict area, in post-conflict area, and in non-conflict area. Next. So we also find that government is actually, no government has ready to face the situation, because this situation is new and it hampers us deeply. And then therefore they are the challenge by the governments. They need to prioritize the program and budget. The challenge to coordinations, and then to do a transparency, because the huge information in everywhere. People want to know what is happening. People want to know what is the governments need to do. People want to know the program done by the government to help us. So there's a lot of challenge. And then because this is a new thing, we in many aspects, the policy has been developed with very limited data. And then in somehow, it's also very limited in public participation. So that's the issues that now coming up in how that the government's response to the COVID-19 will also in one's issues, they have to be very precisely to respond it in quickly, but in the same time, the public participants and women participants need to be still uphold because of the different situations that happen to them. And if they don't actually involve the public participants and women participants, then the government actually cannot tackle the issues effectively. So according to the initiative, beside the government's initiative, we also find that in every country in ASEAN, there are kind of like individual and community level participations. There are effort to shifting the culture of work from the working office to working from home with a different kind of dynamic. Yeah. And in some organizations, they're adjusting the program. And then quite remarkable is actually there is a excessive public participation for solidarity, which I will discuss later on. And in national and regional level, I believe that there are emergency response. Every network discuss about that. There are a lot of consultations going on in the way how to respond to the COVID. A mapping condition is going on as well, as Ibu Danti and then a previous speaker has also discussed. And then it is because of there is a need to redevelop a framework in regional, national, and local level, because we need to have share information. We need to have strengthen the solidarity. So this is not only one country can solve the problem, but in the region level, there is a learning process how to solve and tackle the COVID. Next. So there are sectors that I think it's need to be strengthened, especially in the COVID situation that related to the women agenda, peace agenda. So in general, I think that the governments it is more like the governance mechanism that every country and then regionally we need to evaluate the platform, whether there is a national action plan in different countries or even in 2017's joint statement. And then we also need to strengthen the gender dimension in the program. First is related to the communication, because I think communication and information, because in many countries where the access of communication, where is the lack of access communication, they don't know how to solve the problem. So this is need to be clear that every country will reach all the community to hamper the COVID. And then the issue of food and social security, this is still need to be done, because we know not every country can handle it very well. The security issue is still very problematic, and of course there's education. I think that this is, I agree with the chair of the session that we need to re-emphasize this, that we have actually make a platform on that. And then the specific area that I want to highlight is about the Women Crisis Centers services. We know that during the COVID, every services is going too slow, but we just found in the same time the high number of sexual violence and then the domestic violence happen. So it is important to make sure that even though in the slowdown of services, this kind of services need to be still open. And then also the women's leadership and its acknowledgement. We do know that the remarkable participations of women in community, but when the conflict is end, there are a lot of stories that these women are not a part of the policy making process. They are left behind. So we have to make sure that after the COVID or during the COVID, women's leadership is acknowledged, and then they are part of the decision making process to develop the program in their own community. Next. So I want to go to the second sub-theme that given to me about the WPS joint program. if you look at to the Asians 2007's joint agreement, I think even though Budanti said that it is quite late, but I think it is a good or a remarkable development, which is it has some aspects that are very important in order to strengthening the WPS program. So the first one is about the culture of peace, prevention that educates and empower people. The second aspect is about addressing the root cause of armed conflict. The third aspect is promoting gender equality and reduce social inequality. And the first one is about the integration of gender perspective, and then the protections of women and girls from sexual and gender-based violence, the capacity building of women as peace builder, and then engaging men and boys. I found that during the COVID, these 7 elements or aspect is very important to be re-evaluated and then to be strengthened. Next, so I just want to highlight some aspect. Yeah. The first aspect is about the monitoring and evaluations of the condition of women in different contexts. I think we do find that it's difficult to respond the conflict, the COVID, because in some country there are lack of data about what exactly happened in the community, and then there is a difficulty to gathering it because of the lockdown. So this is kind of problematic because sometimes the program is more likely general program that's not really attached to the situations in different contexts. I'm sorry. For example, I just find out that even though in cities there are social services, there are kind of like aid for the food, they don't have any problem to get rice. But there are the problem is to get the vegetables because they live in a very small area. They don't have kind of, garden. It's quite different with a woman in rural level that they don't have that kind of situation. So there are a different condition that happen to different situation, which I think this is the challenge of the government, how to accommodate the diversities of the situation of women. And the other issue, I think Budanti has already mentioned about the Women Economic Empowerment Program. We just found this COVID is actually the issue of public and domestic become blur, because gender role actually state that women's in-house, husband outside as a public, but this COVID makes that the changing of the condition. Public is private, private is public. House become very important for everybody to earn money, to work, and also in the same time to do stuff, yeah, like economic stuff. So this is to make sure that the women's economic empowerment still important. And then even in economic pandemic, in the COVID pandemic, it showed that women's become more and more flexible in order to earn money than men. And the other one is about the educational program and then cultural and religious approach that is still important. But I want to highlight to the male involvement. Because as I mentioned before, there is house become a public and domestic arena, and then male become very, now it's staying at home. The important thing is how to encourage the culture that the existence of male in home do not put harm to other members, because what we found in certain kind of community, there are more dangers now that a male do sexual violence more easier, and then when the wife are working outside to find informal work, for example. So how to make a male staying at home is not put a danger for everybody's at home, and then how to encourage a male to work in domestic arena, because it is very important if they're existent in house to make a burdens more for women, for example. That's also one aspect stated in the Wps joint agenda. And the other one is database. Next. So related to the database, I think it's important that's the challenge always, to do a very proper database. Usually in many research, there are tendencies to generalize what is happening in the field. But when we look at the conflict, the post-conflict, the non-conflict area, so we've just found that the conflict itself is very dynamic, it's very complex. So where women in it, the complex and divergent context of conflict will actually put the different kind of situations of women. So this is actually related to the sub-theme that also stated in joint program number 2. We need to addressing the root cause of the conflict. So we need to understand that the conflict itself is continuing. Sometimes it happens in certain kind of situation, and in many cases of the area of conflict, the conflict can come multiple. So it's more like 3 periods of the time of the conflict. Yeah, there is a period of the conflict, there is a transition, there is a peace, and there is a new form of conflict. And then there are the changing of the nature of the conflict, even in one area. First, it can be the religious conflict, then it grows into the racial conflict, then it's slowed down, and then suddenly it's become armed conflict. So we know there is an interlink between conflict one to another conflict. Next. So we need to look at it carefully and then find out in which situation of the conflict, what happened to women, and then what kind of strategy to be tackled to women, particularly during the COVID and then after the COVID. This kind of map or studying need to be more deeply to discuss what happened in the field. So I guess this is a difficulties as well, because I found different kind of research online for this time. They are not really touched to what happening in the ground. So if we can't get to know what is happening in the ground, rather than in the provincial level only, because the conflict usually happen in the more like a sub-district, not in the provincial level. So we might have a plan that are not really effective enough to reach the women that we need to support. So that's the issues that I think it's the challenge for us today. So next slide. I need to continue to the discussions about the strategies of women and the sub-theme 3, women's at the forefront in fighting against the COVID-19 pandemic. As it mentioned before by Ibu Dati, and I found as well when I did workshop with my students in different countries, we just found that there are remarkable initiatives happen in our own community. First, it's related to caring the family and the community. So it's more likely independently initiative. They don't really rely on the governments or the local government's initiative. It's more likely independently initiative done by the individual and the community. And then there is a kind of strong social solidarity to share food, grocery, to provide masks and to send even to the different province, and then health kind of equipment as well. So this is kind of remarkable. From the photo that I present to you, this is actually the sharing of the seeds so that everybody can do planting, and they don't have any problem to find their own vegetables, and then they can kill their time rather than feeling stressful in the house. So this kind of initiative is very interesting. Next. They do also have next slide, please. Yeah. Next slide, please. Yep. They do also have a kind of program to share reliable information, because so many hoax about pandemics 19. It create more tense in the community. So this kind of community also try to share information countering the hoax, and then go to the different WA group, social media, to tell what is happening and to say that this is the link of the pandemic if you want to know better about what is happening. So this is a quite remarkable initiative done in community. And then they also try to counter stigmatization of the COVID victim, because there are many potential victims. They don't want to do tests because the stigmatization were very strong. Now it's more and more not as strong as before. So this kind of initiative in local level, very interesting. And then also the collecting data and studies. I saw you here, there is an ongoing review on Wps in Indonesia, and not only in Indonesia, in other regions, which show that the initiative to discuss about what is happening of women's are continue. This is not, in somehow it is independent initiative, but in somehow it is actually linked to the government's program. So last thing that I want to say is about how do we actually re-emphasize this gender perspective as a continuum strategy for peacing during COVID and beyond that. I think our speakers before has also mentioned about the recognizing women agency, recognizing women initiative, recognizing women leadership, because they are there. They are working very effectively for peace building and public solidarity. And the second thing that I need to re-emphasize is actually related to our joint statement 2017. How do we changing the male culture of at home, of domestic work, like sharing burden of domestic work, but also respect to others members in house. And then the third one is about the emergency services like shelter for women. We can't deny that this kind of violence against women continue. We need to provide affirmative actions to still reopen the shelter, to make sure that the shelter is there wherever women need to access the shelter, and then other services. And then I also want to highlight the developing strategies from various forms of activities that sensitize with the different contexts of women in different contexts. So that's the diversity of the program. And then it's related to tackling the contextual issues in different community. And then I think we need to continue to do mapping, documentation for best lesson learned, because we need to share to the success story of tackling the COVID. So everybody's in every countries in ASEAN can handle it very well. I think that's all my presentations today. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ibu, for very constructive academic point of view, especially on the gender perspective on the impact of COVID-19. I definitely agree with you that there are different degrees of the impact of COVID-19 to women and girls, especially in our region. And thank you for drawing up the continuation of women and girls as vulnerable group in the society, especially in the context of conflict and crisis. I thank you very much for striking out, especially on the challenge on the lack of access to education, especially on the drawback or the obstacle of having online teaching. I think this is affecting our children and women in our region. And I especially very encouraged by your pointing out, especially on the involvement of male, which is men and boys, in order to make it an inclusive stakeholders, in order to have the comprehensive fight with the COVID-19. I do have questions though, Ibu, especially on your presentation on women's participation. As you know that women's are in the forefront of the society, and we are the one who have high percentage of using social media. And I think this usage of social media has to be effectively managed, especially by women. And how can this type of usage can help in putting women's role in public participation, as well as to be part of the frontliner for the government policy, as well as the policy in the region. Another question that I'd like to ask, you have draw attention on the importance of women crisis center services. On the academic perspective, how we can improve? You have heard from Ibu Sri Danti Anwar that many of the ASEAN member states have put up the hotlines from these women crisis centers. And how from the academic sector can help us improve this, especially in the challenge of COVID-19. Before I give the question and answer section, I have to just put a short remark that in the ASEAN perspective, we are working very hard. We recognize that in combating with COVID-19 is no government and no one person approach. And it needs to have concrete action. And these include stakeholders like women and girls. And for us, in order to have our region to bounce back better and to be stronger, so we are looking at the action, which is more of an inclusive and sustainable growth in the region. As I said, ASEAN has been working very hard. I think we are one of the regional organizations that has been proactive in the combat of the COVID-19. And we have dealt with issues that's related to health, trade, agriculture, and tourism, which is those sectors that have been hard hit in our region. And the key initiatives that we have come up is the COVID-19 ASEAN Response Fund. Everybody have been talking about the shifting of the resources. We are trying to find a way of having our own fund so that we can combat the COVID-19, especially on the health sector. And we are having the ASEAN development of a comprehensive recovery framework. This is where women's voice has to be heard. And we definitely look forward for a more coordinated action with all stakeholders and all the ASEAN sectoral bodies concerned, all pillars, because this is not only concentrate on one pillar, is all pillars, is cross pillar issue, in order to have a more of a holistic, robust, and pragmatic resolution to our region. So this is something that I like to draw attention that we in ASEAN, we are not, laying very lazy. We are active. We may come a little bit late, but we are responsive. In terms of other region, we are very responsive, and we are going step-by-step approach. So with that, I come to the Q&A. At the moment, there is no one asking for the Q&A, but I have been posing some questions to the speakers. Maybe distinguished speakers can address to those questions. And I have another question, at least from one of the audience who sent directly to me, is on perspective of women, especially women migrant workers. I think maybe Ibu Sri Wiyanti Eddyono, you can address to that, especially on the academic point of view, and of course with Madam Amina, you are an activist. How we can tackle that, especially with the challenge of COVID-19. So with that, can I have Ibu Sri Danti Anwar first to answer some of my questions?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Madam Ambassador. For the first question, you asked about the implementation of the joint statement on women, peace and security in ASEAN. I can only talk on behalf of ACWC. So like I already explained before, we just started the implementing the joint statement together with our ACW, ASEAN Committee on Women, with the conduct of the regional symposium on women, peace and security held on 22nd, 23rd August in 2019 in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. So that was the first activity that we did. The symposium aimed to foster awareness and understanding on WPS from local, national, and regional perspectives. And it also provided a platform for dialogue between ASEAN member states, ASEAN sectoral bodies, and ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation. We also discussed challenges and opportunities in implementing WPS agenda. As I mentioned before, in this symposium, the WPS agenda in ASEAN encompass a broader range of priority areas covering preventing violent extremism. So with regard to the preventing violent extremism, ASEAN member states have already developed action plan on preventing violent extremism in the country. And then it also encompasses women in disaster setting. So there is also ASEAN working group on the disaster management, where gender perspective is also integrated in the policies and program with regard to the natural disaster in ASEAN member state. And the WPS agenda in ASEAN also encompass the transformative role of women in peace process and economic livelihood aspects. I also already share with you that during the symposium, we also discussed on DTOR of the regional study on women, peace and security. So this is actually the second activity that we are doing with regard to the joint statement. So the aim of the regional study on women, peace and security is to identify the challenges, opportunities, policies, programs, best practices, and way forward in how to implement the joint statement. I also already shared with you that this is ongoing process, and we hope that during the side event on the 53rd ASEAN Minister meeting in August, that we can launch this regional study. So based on the regional study, hopefully we will get together with other sectoral bodies. So this is not only the responsibility of one pillar, like I also mentioned before, that women, peace and security is a cross-cutting issue. So hopefully that we can develop the multi-year program. That is, and in the future, maybe we can also have the regional action plan on women, peace and security in ASEAN. While in national level, only Philippines and Indonesia that already have the national action plan on women, peace and security. But I can assure you, based on our discussion in advisory group on women, peace and security, we can identify that some problems as well. So in order to ensure that the joint statement continue to be implemented, we have to find a common understanding on different definition of conflict and peace process, because there's still a different, definition of what is conflict, what is peace process, whether women, peace and security only related to a conflict, and conflict, or it is beyond that. So within this regional study, hopefully we can find that, we can find the solution, and we can identify the mutual areas where AMS could collaborate. And then the second one, in order to be able to implement the joint statement, we also need to overcome the compartmentalization of the word security and gender. Usually the gender is separate body, only the responsibility of ACW, ACWC, while other sectoral bodies in other pillars don't really care. We have the, in order to cross the, to make sure that all the pillars understand about gender. So ACW and ACWC last year, we already conducted a workshop on gender mainstreaming in all the three pillars. Yeah. So at the moment, we have the working group composed ACWC representative and ACW to discuss the follow-up action on the outcome of the workshops of the three pillars. So we are at the moment developing a strategic framework on gender mainstreaming in all the pillars in ASEAN member states. So as you know, the gender mainstreaming, we already have the declaration on gender mainstreaming. Hopefully through the strategic framework on gender mainstreaming, all the three pillars, all the sectoral bodies in ASEAN will integrate gender perspective in their respective policies, programs, and projects, including in women, peace, and security. So, and hopefully that in the future, the National Action Plan on Women, Peace, and Security in ASEAN member states will also be developed. Not only two countries, but all member states can have the National Action Plan as part of the implementation of UNSC 1325. I think that's the first question, Ambassador. The second one is how to increase awareness on the elimination of gender-based violence in ASEAN member state. Well, actually, we have a lot of programs and we have a regional action plan on elimination of violence against women, as well as regional action plan on elimination of violence against children as our umbrella in developing our programs and projects in our work plan. So during this COVID-19 and before that, we already, ICWC in cooperation with other ASEAN sectoral bodies, such as ACW, SOMTC, I'm sorry about this abbreviation to other panelists, ICHA, ACMW, SOMTC, etc., and UN agencies, supported by UN Women, IRM, ILO, DFAT Australia, Asia Foundation, and CSO. We already prepare IEC information, education, and communication through social media. So we use banners, we use Facebook, and we use all sort of communication to increase the awareness of, especially of the families, women, and children on gender-based violence, as well as elimination of children, violence of children. So we also campaign on the ending gender-based exploitation in the workplace last November to commemorate International IPR Day, and online regional launch on the 18th December to commemorate International Migrant Day. So with regard to migrants, women migrants, we also pay attention to the rise of women migrants. So through our campaign, we hope that the women migrant workers can be also taken seriously in our government policies and programs. So I think those are some of the things that I can to share with you. Hope I can answer your question, Madam Ambassador. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibu. It has clarified a lot, especially on the ASEAN effort that we do not lay idle, even with the challenge of the COVID-19. And we have been working hard and putting women's and girls' agenda high up in our region. Madam Amina, you would like to answer some more questions, or you have any comments on anything?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, first you were asking about the impact on poverty. Let me just reiterate that it is crucial to make sure that funds get directly into the hands of women, not just in the business sector, where many of our entrepreneurs are suffering from the 4 months lockdown, but specifically into the hands of the most directly affected. And now we're talking about the communities that are under lockdown. In the Philippines, we have a model that we're using now to help make sure that money gets into the hands of the families that have been greatly affected. And this is the conditional cash transfer system. The conditional cash transfer system has been operating in the Philippines for, I think, more than 10 years now. And it calls for government to provide funding, monthly funding, directly into the hands of mothers as long as they implement certain conditions. One is to make sure that their children, their school-age children, are healthy. And second, that these children stay in school. Our government has used this particular strategy to ensure that funds to alleviate the negative effects of COVID get into the hands of women who are at the poorest of the poor communities. And I think it is something that perhaps our governments in ASEAN could also take a serious look at. We also need to take a look at the problem of the women migrants, in fact, all migrants. The recession that has been happening globally and has affected the labor receiving countries. And this has particular impact on Indonesia and the Philippines, two of the largest labor sending countries in Asia. There are thousands and thousands of returning workers. They are stranded in the capital regions because of the lockdown. And men and women are put together in facilities. There is very little segregation because all of us are caught flat-footed. We are not equipped to handle such a problem. How do we deal with this? And this is a problem that ASEAN together must take a look at, because many of our countries are labor-sending countries. And as you very well know, where there are many stranded workers together in one area, a lot of abuses could also take place, and we have to guard against this. Lastly, I would like to reiterate that the ASEAN's Women for Peace Registry, which was created 2 years ago and is supported by the Institute for Peace and Reconciliation under Reslan, is, I think, a good vehicle for women advocates, women leaders of ASEAN to come together and take a look at how we can ensure that the WPS agenda that has been supported by ASEAN, particularly in the 2017 resolution, how we can implement it in the time of COVID. I would suggest that perhaps those who are listening to us now could talk to government leaders and find out how we can add more resources, put some muscle into the AUPR, the ASEAN Women for Peace Registry, because this is the one particular group I can see where WPS is a major agenda item. Thank you.
Amina, for your response as to my question. And Madam Ibu Sri Wiyanti Eddyono, you have your time now to answer
Thank
the
you
question.
very much, the chair. So the first questions to me related to online utilize, how do we utilize the online media online for women? Because we know that online, the online vehicles, internet, has two sides. The first side, if we can use it very effectively, it's become the opportunity. So it can create economic solidarity connection amongst the consumer and then the producers from the one village to the province, even different provinces. So that can be a very effective way to connect the consumer, the women in one area to others women, and then the women in the community. In this, is it okay? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And then the other opportunity is actually because of the online user effectively, everybody can access the web binder, everybody can access knowledge, everybody can share information, everybody can respond quickly what happened in the other countries. Yet we notice as well, this information is not really cheap. We need to purchase internet from web binder. We counting is about 305 giga to be need to be used for web binder for the school, for and then for that kind of seminar. So it's always like two sides. The other problem is also now with the using of the media, the case of sexual violence through media platform is also raised. It means that in somehow this kind of tools become the problematic for women if women does not aware of the use of the media. If a woman doesn't know how to use it properly, and if there is no guidance, there is no awareness for everybody how to use media more kind of like awareness, media properly. So it's not make it you as the victim, because in Indonesia, for example, we have two big issues related to sexual violence through media. That's just recently happened. So the victim is actually women's a housewife in different province done by one person by using text and then different kind of media online. So that's kind of a backlash as well. Another issue is related to the online. We can only reach those who are living in the good infrastructure. It is quite difficult for those who are in conflict area or in post-conflict area with the lack of communication infrastructure. So this contact is quite difficult to monitor, and we don't know what happened over there. So it makes a limitation for everybody to access, because in many cases, when there is the conflict area, the restriction, it's become the restriction area with not everybody can access the area. And then it happened to those who are in conflict area. It's not like other people who have free access to access everything. So this kind of situation will be is become the good opportunity for us in the middle up class in the very good facilities, but still become the lack of access to those who are in the remote area and then in the conflict and post-conflict area. So that's my comment. But it is, so how do we fill the gap? This is something that we need to going on because it is most hopefully it is the temporary situations, but in somehow it's not a easy answer to solve. Yeah, even though I have a program to do research in different areas, so I have to cancel it because of difficulties to reach that kind of area. So there's always a limitation for this day, even though we can use the online. Yeah, not everything can be discussed through online. So the second question is about the improve the Women Crisis Center, because they are reported by Ibu Danti, the hotline services is there. But what we found, not every province have a hotline center. Not every, the number of hotline center is very limited to a certain kind of province. And then in the areas, they are the cutting budget, yeah, moving from the services to the COVID responses. For example, we just found that visum or other services are not yet are no longer supported by a certain kind of law enforcer, for example. And then this is a kind of the issue. The other issue is related to the vulnerable of those who are assisting the women, because I found even though they do hotline, some women crisis center or some legal aid need to assist the victims directly. So they are very vulnerable to infected. And then this is something that we don't really focus on before. We focus on those who are working in the medical, working in the health services, but other services need also be pay attention and to support them in order to protocol COVID to help women and children who suffer because of violence against women. And then the third issues related to the migrants worker, I want to add the previous speaker. I think COVID-19 is give us more understanding about the intensify the political identity based on nationality. In the first, second, and the third months of the COVID, every country actually focusing to assist their own citizens. So those who are not the citizens, even though it's not every country, but some countries still focusing on their own citizens. So this is part of what I call that the political identity of nationality. And then there is no enough social security that cover what happens to them in this particular situation. So they have to send back to the countries, back to their village. They become very vulnerable of the COVID. There are evidence they are infected by COVID in the community, and it spread into their family member. So this kind of situation actually create another tensions in the community and then also in the house, because usually they become, they earning money, they go back to the house, they become what they call themselves as a burden in their own family. So that's kind of tensions quite problematic. And then I think I agree with the other speakers. ASEANs need to discuss about it to make a plan. How do we solve this kind of situations? Because we actually have the ASEAN declarations of migrants worker. and how do we make a link between one instrument in ASEAN to another instruments that mentioned by Ibu Danti before, to make a link between what we have in the ASEAN and then to integrate it one state, one declarations to another declaration and make a very firm of the plan of actions. So that's a very challenging and then but also very important to be done in ASEAN level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibu, and that has clarified a lot of doubts, perhaps, and it's a good response. I have many comments and some questions in the chat room, and some of the questions, most of our speakers have more or less touched on it, but the comment made are very valuable. I think what I can do with the respect of time constraint, I would ask the those who have posed the comments and questions in the chat room, leave your contact emails or WhatsApp, whatever, to the organizer, so that our distinguished speakers can contact you directly in answering those questions. There are very good comments, especially on the situation of women that are directly affected by armed conflict situation. Ceasefire have not been put into place. I think this is very relevant to our region. But as I said, due to time constraint, I won't be posing this question now, but I hope that with the contact that those who have posed the questions, so that the speakers can answer you directly. But before I conclude, may I ask distinguished speakers to give one message to the audience regarding our webinar today. I will give the floor to Ibu Sri Wiyanti Eddyono first. Please,
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think the Wps Agenda is still very important to be upheld and then to be re-emphasized, especially for the area of the conflict, yeah, because we do what I mentioned before, we do need to mapping the different contexts of the conflict where women in it. It means that we do need to understand what is the problem they face in every situation of the conflict. And then because of the male dominated is very high in the masculinity in the conflict area. So women's experiences need to be heard. Women's experiences need to be reconsidered into the Asians platform. And then how do we tackle this, you know, integrated it into the other programs, not only WPS as independent one, but it's more likely to link it to the other instruments. So that's very important.
very much, Ibu. Madam Amina.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In closing, I really just want to urge our governments and ASEAN to put some muscle into the implementation of the ASEAN resolution supporting women, peace, and security. The creation of the ASEAN Women for Peace Registry is in pursuit of that. But AUPR lacks the resources required so that we can work together and try to find out if we can develop a stronger implementation program for WPS, which can be implemented during this pandemic. And lastly, I know that coronavirus, COVID-19, is clearly the defining crisis for all of us in the whole world. And I know that strong government programs are required to ensure that the populations follow recommendations and strategies to prevent the expansion of the infection, such as wearing a mask, social distancing. But let me also caution that as we implement these strong programs to prevent the expansion of coronavirus, let it not lead to the shrinking of civic spaces, to the easing out of women's participation in policy and in program implementation. Because I have been noticing that this is happening. Women, after all, as has been shown by gender disaggregated data coming from several countries, seem to have developed better immunities to COVID than our male counterparts. And again, I ask the question, why aren't you tapping us more for partnership in putting together the COVID programs? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Amina. Ibu Sri Danti Anwar, last words.
Okay, thanks, Madam Chair. Women and children is a cross-cutting issue. It's not only the responsibility of one sectoral body in ASEAN member states, but it should be the responsibility of all ASEAN member states as well as multi-sectoral bodies. In order to do that, we need to increase our coordination, collaboration, and synergy in our programs and projects. And apart from that, we also need to increase our monitoring and evaluation of our respective programs. So hopefully we also can work very closely together with non-governmental organizations, especially women organizations, CSO, private sectors, and the media to help us to advocate the whole community on gender issues, children issues, especially on the impact of COVID-19 to them. By this, hopefully, we can beat or combat the of gender issues as well as children issues in the long run. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ibu. I think we all have heard the messages as well as substantive presentation of our distinguished speakers. I think all of us acknowledge and recognize the challenge of COVID-19 as the impact to women and girls, especially in our region. But the important message that we all want to have is to turn the COVID-19 as an opportunity for change. So gender equality is a business of imperative, especially to our region. And women's voice has to be heard and recognized, and has to receive equal access, and to be at the forefront as influencer, decision maker, and agent of change in time of crisis and recovery. So I think as we have the organizer, which is ASEAN-IPR, I believe the resident some homework. We have had many messages and many questions, and also policy options that the speakers have already put on board. I hope that ASEAN-IPR and take up some of the policy options for the GC, the Governing Council consideration, and of course with the advisory board, especially on the researches that we can do on the women security agenda. And I don't know if the organizer can help us put all the attendees in the Zoom, font. I would like the audience to give me the hand raise as the gesture of appreciation to the distinguished speakers, as well as to the organizer, which is the ASEAN-IPR. So organizer, can you change everybody, put everybody into one font, one platform? Can you do that? You cannot do that. You cannot do that. Okay, but anyway, everybody, please turn on your mic and then clap your hands.
Hi.
Thank you very much to all the audience who have been participating in the chat room. I'm so sorry that I cannot put that into this webinar, but your comment and your questions will be answered. And so with this, I would like to adjourn the webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, okay, sorry. ED Rasul, you want to say something? Oh, Kun Devida.
Thank you, Ambassador Phasporn. Distinguished participants, we are nearing the end of our webinar, but before closing it, on behalf of ASEAN-IPR, I would like to thank Ambassador Phasporn for skillfully moderating the very interesting discussions on the impact of COVID-19 related to the WPS agenda in ASEAN. Words of thank you and highest appreciation goes to the three speakers for their insights and recommendations on how to maintain the WPS agenda in the face of COVID-19 pandemic. And also thank you to the attendees for being present and engaging in our discussion. I kindly inform you that I have provided you the link to the speaker's materials, which you can be which can be found in the chat box. I would also like to take this opportunity to inform you that our second webinar will be held on the 20th of August, 2020, taking on the theme of peace building in Southeast Asia, looking into the best practices of complementary efforts between governments and non-governmental actors. This webinar is a collaboration between the ASEAN-IPR and the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies from Cambodia. And so we hope to see you again in the next webinar. And thank you. Stay safe and healthy, and until next time.
Thank you.